Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asha Reed, the city clerk, and I will be talking about the legislative process. And this is an overview. Of course, there are many details involved in this process, and I've tried my best to condense it down. I will also add that city clerk staff will also be going over a more detailed work process for your staff that will be doing scheduling for you at a later time. Next slide, please. It is the government's duty to serve the public and in reaching its decisions to accommodate those who wish to obtain information about or participate in the process. All meetings of local bodies are open to the public as required by the Brown Act. Any barriers to participation are prohibited. Next slide, please. What is Oakland's process and what does it do? Our workflow was established in 1985 and modified in 2001. It upholds Oakland's Sunshine Policy and the California Brown Act. It initiates the public to participate and allows for change of policy and management in the city. And it also affords for opportunities for change in policy proposals and extends open feedback for the public. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights of the workflow. The city's legislative workflow covers a wide range of authority. The authorities of the governing bodies, the administration, the city attorney, city clerk, and council president, all of which the city attorney went into detail previously. The permitted actions that may be taken on legislative matters by the governing bodies and its members. I will break that down into detail as it regards to your your council rules of procedure. The deadlines when which to make agendas available to the city council and the public, the details set forth, the amendments of the agenda reports, the information that contributes to the city councils and public understanding of the matters of interest and aid in the ability to track these matters. Next slide, please. The legislative process consists of many different rules, one of which being the Sunshine Ordinance, which does consist in 3 parts. Ordinance number 12463, ordinance number 12483, and ordinance number 12668. The rules that make up Oakland's rules come from many policies, which I will provide you after this presentation. I didn't want to overwhelm you with the number of emails and the amount of supplemental information that I have for you about this presentation. The current iteration of the rules of procedure, which the council president went over, that you all will be hopefully adopting some changes to those rules in the near future, as well as the Brown Act, the Maddie Act. The Maddie Act is the list of appointments to the city's boards and commissions and is updated annually, and that act is handled by the mayor's office. There are also other rules that govern the city and allow the city to facilitate its meetings. Those include Robert's Rules of Order and any other resolutions or ordinances that you may pass as a council body. Next slide. The type of legislative matters that you will be implementing or voting on as you move through the process on your agendas. An information report allows the council to provide follow-up, but does not permit any action by the council. It is simply for information only. Reports and recommendations seek to direct staff to perform work to develop work that will eventually lead to policy. Resolutions permit policy actions and approve programs, release, pursuit, and acceptance of funds, authorize contracts and agreements. Ordinances change legal requirements and provide for changes to fee structures, change of organizational structures, and when applicable, also authorize contracts and agreements. It's important as you develop policy throughout your time as a council member that you work closely with the city attorney to determine the correct format for your legislation, as well as the correct titles for your legislation. Next slide, please. So the internal routing of agenda items. It is important to note that as council members, you are not required to route your your policy through the administration. However, it is important that you consider this route when you are routing your items. The internal department review is within your council office, but you do want to make sure that you have reviewed by the city attorney to make sure that your item is legally sound. You want to run it through budget to make sure you can identify where the funding is coming from for your item. You also want to check in with HR to make sure that there's no meet and confer or any other things that could conflict with the adoption of your policy. It's important that you get those things done before the item is scheduled, so the committees are not discussing those changes on the floor, which could also lead to the delay of your item. Considering all those things, if you've done those things, you will bring your item to scheduling at the Rules Committee, where it will end up for discussion at a city council committee, or if necessary, it can be scheduled directly to the council. Next slide, please. This is a physical representation of what I just spoke about, but it's important for you to see to determine how to route your item and what department is responsible for which things. As you're aware, the attorney is responsible for legal representation and legal review of your item. Budget determines if we can afford to do your item or where the funding is coming from. And again, you are not required to follow this process, but it's important that you consider some of the things in this process to make sure that your item runs smoothly through the city's process. In all matters, all items do need to be scheduled by the Rules Committee. They will have to be turned into the city clerk's office for publication in the agenda packet. It's also important that when your item is going to review before the Rules Committee, that the city attorney is aware of your title, gives you input about the title. It's important that they're not just seeing your title for the first time when it appears in the rules packet. It's also important that your legislation is in its best final format when it's going to a committee or a council. It may still be in draft, but make sure that it's the best draft that you can present at that time. Next slide, please. I'm going to get into the authority of the Rules Committee. As you are aware, the Rules Committee is the scheduling body for the city of Oakland. And all things pass through the Rules Committee, even if they've been discussed at a previous council committee. The Rules Committee has the final authority to schedule an item to account to the city council. And also, if rules does not meet, Rule 28 does come into play, but Rule 28 is only applicable when there's no intervening Rules Committee. So if you're trying to schedule an item and you miss rules, or rules was canceled, but your item is not time sensitive and there is a Rules Committee next week, because the Rules Committee is every Thursday, then you will need to schedule your item at the next Rules Committee. But next slide, please. So Rules speaks to the power regarding agenda items. The Rules and Legislation has jurisdiction to assign all agenda items to council. The rules authority is actually taken directly from your current council rules of procedure. And this speaks to how items come to rules. So anybody can schedule an item to the Rules Committee, one or more members of the city council, an individual city council member, a committee, the mayor, the city administrator, the city attorney, the city auditor, and any member of the public can schedule an item to the Rules Committee. For the public out there who do wish, because that was a question previously, for the public who wish to schedule an item to the Rules Committee, you will contact the city administrator's office, and they can assist you with filling out the scheduling request to schedule an item to the Rules Committee. If you need assistance with that, the city clerk's office is always available to assist you in that action. And you can email cityclerk@oaklandca.gov, and we will forward it to the correct person if you are unable to navigate the system. So the Rules Committee can assign and schedule to a subject matter committee or for staff to review and report back to the requester. Or directly to the City Council. If the Rules Committee is scheduling directly to the City Council on your behalf, you have to state a reason for that to occur, and that is directly stated by your rules of procedure. The Rules Committee should not refer any item directly to the full council unless the Rules Committee determines by majority that those present that item should be scheduled directly to the City Council for a specified reason. The Rules Committee shall also assign and schedule any informational item for consideration and accept either by committee or directly to the full council. And next slide. And I believe I covered that already. The Rules Committee shall also have the authority in establishing specific agenda items to be placed on the agenda. The Rules and Legislation Committee shall establish the consent and non-consent calendar. I believe the council president also touched on this previously, and also has the power to place an item that is urgent on a supplemental agenda for a council meeting if no action was taken on the item due to cancellation of committee, due to lack of quorum, or because the committee ran out of time. Because the committee was not able to approve any recommended action and the committee passes by motion the affirmative votes for the majority of the members present. Next slide. And all of that is taken directly from Rule 24 of your council rules of procedure. So the times and meetings of your committees. Finance and Management Committee is currently meeting on the second and fourth Tuesdays at 10:30. The Public Safety Committee meets on Monday, preceding the second and fourth Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. The Life Enrichment Committee is meeting on Monday, preceding the second and fourth Tuesday at 4:30. And the Public Works Committee is second and fourth Tuesday at 10:30. Community and Economic Development Committee is second and fourth Tuesday at 2 p.m. And the Rules and Legislation Committee meets every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. If you looked at some of the documents for the current rules of procedure, you'll notice that the city does have education partnership and the Port Board Authority. Hopefully I said that correctly. Those are ad hoc committees of the council and are not standing committees. So they don't have regular meeting times at this time. When the chair wishes to schedule those committees, she or he or they come to the Rules Committee to determine that they would like to schedule an item. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to get into some of the purview of the committees. As you schedule things through rules, if you are a chair of the committee, it's important that you are aware of the purview of each committee. We don't schedule things to committee just because it's our item and we're the chair of a specific committee. Each committee has an assigned topic of responsibility or topics of responsibility. The Finance and Management Committee is general management of financial revenue and expenditure reporting and administrative operations. Some of the typical reports that run through finance are revenue and expenditure reports and status of the state and federal budget. You also have Public Works Committee, which is public infrastructure, transportation, streets and potholes and sewers. Typical reports that run through that committee or typical topics are illegal dumping, recycling contracts, things with waterfronts and trails, and in some cases, things with parks. Community and Economic Development Committee handles housing, economic development, workforce development, general planning and zoning. Typical reports that run through that department or typical topics are quarterly code enforcement, the rent adjustment program, as well as details about the downtown specific plan. Your Life Enrichment Committee, Health and Human Services, Library Services, Department of Race and Equity, Parks and Recreation, Cultural Affairs, Typical topics that run through that report, through that committee, are homeless services contracts, human services programs such as summer food program, as well as shelter programs. Public Safety Committee, police, fire, health and human services, Department of Violence Prevention. Typical topics and reports that run through that committee are emergency operations updates, negotiated settlement agreement, and as already stated, police and fire staffing. The Rules and Legislation Committee is the scheduling body of the City of Oakland. It has authority over the rules, review of Assembly and Senate bills, ballot measures of the City Council, general oversight to the offices of the City Administrator, City Clerk, and City Attorney. The Rules Committee is also responsible for appointments. They're responsible to review appointments to the Planning Commission, the Port Commission, Housing, Residential, Rent, and Relocation Board, as well as the Police Commission. All of those appointments run through the Rules Committee first before they appear on a council agenda. And that is also set forth by your rules of procedure. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into the legislative process and actions by committee. So this slide is the setup is a little different. I'm going to talk about the action as well as indicate which rule applies to the action. So you're aware of what you can do in committee and the authority of the committee. So as a committee chair, you shall develop with staff the schedule to hear items to be confirmed by a majority of the committee. As a committee chair, it's also important that you are aware and participate in the Rules Committee, or at least have your staff present, so you are aware of the items that are being scheduled to your committee, so you can control the flow of your committee if that wasn't discussed with you previously. The committee may, by vote of the majority of the members present, decide to postpone, continue, or table an item on the agenda. That is according to Rule 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 of your current rules of procedure. On any item on an agenda, the committee chair may allow for an informational presentation by city staff related to that item. And that is Rule 5.5 of your current rules of procedure. And I've already discussed what an informational item is, any item that does not require action. Each committee shall review the minutes of its previous meeting, make corrections to mistakes, if any, and approve the minutes by majority vote of the members present. And that is according to Rule 5.6 of your current rules of procedure. Next slide, please. Each committee is responsible to approve the recommendations of staff. That means that you're approving the report as the staff presented it. You can also amend the recommendation from staff, or you can fail to approve the recommendation from staff. You can approve an alternate recommendation, which is an amendment. You can reject, and you can also request additional information. And all of those come from Rule 5.4 of your current rules of procedure. Next slide, please. Some of the reasons that your item can be, the Rules Committee shall have the power to place items that are urgent on the supplemental or special council meeting agenda if no action was taken. I believe this is a duplicate slide. But due to the cancellation of a committee meeting, due to lack of quorum, because the committee ran out of time, because the committee was not able to approve any recommended action, and the committee passes a motion by affirmative votes of the majority of the members who are present, requesting that the Rules Committee schedule the item for a council meeting. It's important to know that if any committee is canceled, whether it's a regular standing council committee, specifically the rules committee, that no items are automatically carried to the next agenda. You have to come to the rules committee to tell the committee or express to the committee your desire of where you would like your item to be placed on agenda, whether you wanted to carry forward to the next committee, or if you would like it to be scheduled directly to council. You have to indicate where you want your items to go. Next slide, please. More direction of your subject matter committees. Information reports. So information reports are adopted or received by the majority votes of those present without forwarding to the council. They can also be received and forwarded to the council. It's important to be aware, as a committee chair, certain reports are required to go before council. They cannot just be adopted at the committee level. You can also request by motion a second more specific information from staff or the originator of the proposed informational item. The item may be continued or rescheduled for further consideration at the soonest possible date, allowing time for appropriate notice pursuant to the Sunshine Ordinance. Next slide, please. This is simply a physical breakdown of what I just discussed, the difference between action items and informational items. Action items, if an item is not approved, it does not move forward. If it is approved, it can be scheduled to council. If it is continued or deferred, it will return to committee. Informational items are received and filed at the committee level, or they can be received and forwarded to the council, or they can also be continued where they will return to the committee. Next slide, please. Possible delays that can affect your item. If the committee amends the item beyond the scope of what is noticed and it becomes a new item, it is required to meet the 10-day noticing for an agenda, and it will not be able to move forward as is and will have to be rescheduled. The committee or council may ask for more information. In that case, you may be required to, in a way, your item is continued and more information can be provided, and then the council or committee may discuss your item. The body can fail to act. The body determines that the item is not under the purview of a specific committee, and they will send it back to rules to reassign. And of course, if a meeting is canceled, it could possibly delay your item. And as I stated before, it is important that you stay with your item to keep track. If a committee was canceled and your item was on that agenda, it is important that you show up at rules to determine to express where you would like your item to go. Next slide. Actions of the council are very similar to what you see in committee. The council may approve the committee's recommendation, or they can select one of the committee's alternatives, or they can provide their own recommendation on a proposed item. By majority of the council members present, they can also continue an item to the next council meeting if the deadlines or if the Sunshine Ordinance or the Brown Act allow that to occur. And also, if it's an ordinance, sometimes you can't continue an item to the next meeting if it's on a second reading, because there are different requirements that we have to go through. We have to post notice and digest in the paper. And because we're limited to when the paper runs, that can also affect how your item is continued or scheduled to any meeting. A council by the majority of the members present can refer an item to a subject committee for reconsideration, or with respect to an item that the Rules Committee referred directly to council, the council may take any action subject to the Brown Act and the Sunshine Ordinance. It's also important to note that the council in its full body is the only body that can, in a sense, supersede the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee is the scheduling body of the city. However, the council has the authority to schedule an item without it going through the Rules Committee. Next slide, please. Actions of the council. Any agendized information report the council may receive and file, or they may receive a report in an oral presentation. Oral presentations are the same as informational reports. And if a report is scheduled as an oral report, no information can be included with the item. And the council can also choose to not take action on any agenda item. And in that case, an item fails, the vote fails, or they can just decide not to act on a specific item. Next slide. Council adoption. So actions items require majority vote by the council for passage or approval. Resolutions appear on an agenda one time, and they require 5 affirmative votes to pass. Regular ordinances require 2 readings. They appear on your agendas as an introduction ordinance and a final passage. Regular resolutions and regular ordinances require 5 affirmative votes. There are other types of ordinances such as urgency or emergency ordinances that may require, emergency ordinances may only appear on an agenda one time. They are adopted the same day at one meeting. And in some cases, emergency ordinances and urgency ordinance do require 6 votes as opposed to your regular 5 votes. Reports and recommendations require 1 reading and require 4 affirmative votes for passage without a tie vote. Next slide, please. So how can you access your materials? The City of Oakland has a website with all agendas, minutes. You can access videos. You can also access your legislation. We also have an app called iLegislate, which I will be providing you an overview at a later time. I will provide you how as a council member and your staff, you will download iLegislate, and I will do an overview with you to show you how to use it. So this is the link for accessing the agenda materials. We try our best to, anytime a meeting is scheduled outside of the regular calendar, to get that up on Legistar as soon as possible. So the public is aware when meetings are, the public and city staff are aware of when meetings are occurring. And as I stated before, I will be providing you supplemental information for all the rules of procedure, all iterations of the Sunshine Ordinance, the city charter, a copy of the scheduling request form that you will be using to schedule your items to the Rules and Legislation Committee, and as well as access to iLegislate and an overview of how to use that application. And the city clerk staff, in conjunction with the city administrator staff, will provide a detailed overview for your staff who will be supporting you through the legislative process. Next slide, please. Final legislation. It's important as a council member, as a council office, that you follow your legislation till the end. Final legislation is signed by the city attorney. It has a CMS number, which is the number circled at the top, and it is signed off with the vote count on the last page of the legislation by the city clerk. Once an item is adopted, it takes about 7 days for us to complete that process. As I stated, legislation is given an enactment number, scanned and posted online, and also becomes a permanent record and stored in the city vault. And final legislation is also available on our website through Legistar, and anybody can search and view final legislation at any time. Next slide. So the agenda team that helps facilitate this process is the city clerk's office and the office of the city administrator. For your staff or for any city staff who would like to attend, we do also provide an overview of all the meeting actions to understand the motions that were made through the meetings. We also use this time to go over council policy directives. And it's very important that your staff are required to attend that meeting. Next slide. And that is it. And I am available for questions